This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Celinska. I'm your host and the founder of the Voice of Early Childhood. And today I have with me Carla Ward, who is the owner of Early Learning Foundations. Thank you, Carla, very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to be a guest. I'm not used to being a guest on podcasts.
Yes, yeah. So Carla, you have your own podcast, which I'm sure you'll share with us in a second. And yeah, there's lots to address about, who you are, what you do, why we're talking about yes spaces, because that's our topic for this episode, all about yes spaces. So in a second, we'll go into what that means for children and for educators and kind of more widely in society, I guess. But first of all, tell us a little bit about, like I said, who you are, where you're from, what you do, and why you enjoy and you speak about yes spaces.
Absolutely. So my name is Carla Ward. I have been an early childhood educator for almost 20 years. I started out at 19, and I feel like it was my true calling to be an early childhood educator, to work with not only the children, but I've always been called to work with adults. And I run my own business, Early Learning Foundations, and I'm the host of the Everything EC podcast. And I always joke that if you cut me, I will bleed education, because to me, it is the only thing I know in this world. And to me, it is the most important thing on the face of this earth. And that is where yes spaces truly come in, because children are not... The goal of working with children is not to make them into functioning adults. It's to make them into, or to support them in being contributing members of society where they're at. It's not where they're going to be. It's meeting children where they're at.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, often we do say no to children in, day-to-day, in our day-to-day lives. Don't do this, don't do that, don't touch that. So it's so important to have more of that positive outlook, rather than, almost like punishing children straight away for something that they may want to do, and they may be unsure of, like, I guess, the unspoken rules in quotation marks and things like that. So, really empowering, I guess, children to be able to say yes more as well, and educators to be able to say yes more, and having that outlook of, well, let's say yes and try and make things happen as well, instead of being a little bit more kind of reserved and negative and being, oh, I'm not sure about this, I don't know if we can do this.
Absolutely. And a yes space, simply put, is a space for yes. But the deeper end of that is a space where children can explore, discover without limits, but also without the risk of getting hurt in a bad way. I'm all about risky play, but not getting hurt on a dangerous level. And the reason for that is because if we don't provide children with a yes space when they're little, where they can learn to trust their own instincts, to trust their own abilities, and to believe in themselves that they're competent and capable, they will grow up to become possibly students, teenagers, adults that test limits, or students or adults and teenagers that don't know their limits. And they will experiment. We all experiment. I can think of my teenage years, but I knew my limit. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a very yes space environment. And I really saw the benefit, because when I say no, no means something. When I hear no, no means something. But when a child hears no all the time, like an average toddler hears no 400 times a day. Whoa. That is 16 times an hour if they don't nap. That is insane. Like, that is a lot. And we as adults, we're coming from a place of caring. No, 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 feet down, no, off the table, off this. But we have to start shifting our view of what's happening when the toddler is climbing the table, when the toddler is standing up on the chair. We need to start asking ourselves, why? Why were they climbing on the table? Are they craving that gross motor? Remember, they've just learned to use some of their body parts. They were crawling and now they're walking. We've been walking for 30 plus years. They've been walking for 30 days for some of them. And when you get something new, you want to test its limits. I think about when people started using drones and they had cameras to them. They were going to test the limits. How far off the cliff can I fly my drone? How high up can this thing go? Well, that's what children are doing with their limbs. How high up can I climb with these limbs? How high will they take me? I don't need mom to get the thing off the top shelf because now I can get the thing off the top shelf. I'm capable of doing this. Now, again, obviously safety is a factor, but when a child hears no 400 times a day, that word is going to lose all meaning. And then when they are actually in danger, they're not going to hear your words.
Yeah, that is such a good point. I didn't really consider it in that sense, in terms of, hearing no so many times that it loses its meaning. And, when you mentioned boundaries, it really is about teaching children to respect other people's boundaries, understanding that when someone says no, it means no, just like you mentioned there. That's such a good point. It's so much bigger than just the safety aspect. And then I'm thinking as well of, like I mentioned, having a more positive outlook, but taking risks more when they grow into, early adulthood as well. Taking themselves out of their comfort zone and looking for situations that can push them and make them grow, I guess, as well as saying yes to things that they may not usually say yes to, and taking up challenges. And that's so important, isn't it, in terms of growth and learning. I always say you can only grow when you're out of your comfort zone, or you grow more when you're out of your comfort zone, at least, and when you seek that discomfort.
Absolutely. And we're not in the business of creating robots. That's not our goal as educators. Education is right in our title as early childhood educators. And what is education? It's providing a learning opportunity for children to discover who they are and what they're capable of. So when they take risks, whether it's putting a finger in paint or whether it is playing with their broccoli, maybe the child playing with their broccoli is thinking about the texture and the smell. Maybe that child becomes so interested in broccoli that they then start to explore other vegetables, and then they really get into cooking and become a chef. We don't know the direction a child's life is going to go because most of us are only with them till maybe 6 years old, or maybe just for the time they're in our toddler room or preschool room. But if we stop them, I can tell you the direction their life is not going to go. Right? We have to stop putting up walls.
Yeah, that is such a good point. And I guess that's difficult, especially when we're working with parents and families, in the sense of allowing children to take risks. You mentioned safety there, but sometimes as adults and as educators, we may think, well, it may be okay for a child to hurt themselves because they learn, but there's just those blurred lines, those, boundaries there between a child hurting themselves too much and then not wanting to take a risk again, or hurting themselves and learning something from that. So I always struggle myself, with that. As an educator, it's kind of different because, you have that role to play in terms of risk assessment, and you're really responsible for the parents, the families, children, and, in terms of working at the setting as well, at the nursery or school. But then as myself as an individual with my friends or family's children, I kind of feel like I take more of that risk, or allow more of that risk to happen, because it's kind of a lot more from my own personal perspective and me as a person, rather than I've got the responsibility for parents that are paying to come to a setting, etc.
And it really is a balance. And you have to go with your own instinct. Like sometimes we have to push ourselves out of our comfort zone as educators, but you don't want to go so far on the extreme that, you have children hanging upside down on 10-foot poles where, a serious brain injury could occur. That is danger. But I remember a parent just losing it on me because her child slipped off a tree log that, no joke, was maybe 6 inches off the ground, if even that. And there were no broken limbs. It was a scratch. But even when we're looking at yes spaces and we're looking at the risk assessment, it's also how we use our words to speak to the child. So instead of saying, be careful, use words like, is your whole foot on the log? Are you holding the railing with both hands? So telling the child what they need to do to be successful, not what not to do. So when we say something like, be careful, well, what does that mean?
What does that mean? Yeah.
What does that mean, right? Like, it's such a, and I was notorious for it in my day, but it's a useless thing to say to a child because they don't know what the limit is. So they don't know what careful looks like.
How do they be careful? Yeah. What does it mean? And when you said that straight away in terms of, change your language, you're really supporting children to assess their own risks rather than telling them, be careful and don't do this or do that, or put your foot there or don't do that. It's about questioning, have you done this? Have you done that? How does your body feel, kind of thing? So really encouraging children to listen, I guess, to their bodies and I guess kind of tune into how are they feeling, where are they, and also are they feeling scared as well, and then how to navigate that as well, not just the adult told me to do this or the adult told me it's too high. Maybe asking them, do you feel comfortable? Does this feel like it's too high? Or maybe even that in itself is a leading question.
But exactly, because the big game here is that we're trying to help them feel autonomy, control over their own lives. There's a professor from the 1930s that when everybody else was researching what caused depression, what caused anxiety, he was looking to what caused happiness. Why were people happy? And he discovered that the number one thing that helped people be happy was control over their own life. That was the number one deciding factor on happiness. Well, we all want children to be happy. That's why we got into this, was to make a difference in children's lives.
Yeah.
And that implies building happy children. And a child that knows themselves, feels a sense of belonging, has autonomy in their environment, and feels safe and supported in their environment, that's a happy child because they have control over a life where they have very little control. They go where we tell them, they wake up when we tell them, they go to sleep when we tell them. So anytime we can give a child a piece of control in their life, we're helping lead them to a happier well-being.
Hiya, just quickly, I wanted to ask a favor from all of the listeners and viewers. It would really help this podcast if you subscribe on the platform you are listening or watching on. This will help the Voice of Early Childhood podcast to continue putting out thought-provoking and reflective episodes with a range of guests. And if you are enjoying listening to this podcast, please do share it with someone else who you think would love it too. And of course, as always, we encourage you to share your voice too. If you have reflections, thoughts, and comments, please do share this episode on social media with your comments and tag the Voice of Early Childhood. Let's keep these thought-provoking discussions going. Thank you. I'll let you get back to the episode now. It's really giving them that sense of ownership, authority over what they're doing, voice as well, allowing them to make decisions. Yeah, it's really respecting their rights as children, as human beings, to make decisions about themselves rather than us as adults making decisions for them.
Exactly. And we're not always going to be with them. Children grow up, they become teenagers and unsupervised teenagers of all things. We have to know that we've laid that foundation for them to be in a group of peers where there is going to be peer pressure. That is the way society works. But be put in a position where they know that what they feel or say is correct. Not because an adult has told them that they can or can't feel this way, because they've been given the autonomy to learn who they are. So when they don't want to do something, they can say no, and they don't feel the pressure that so many of us did as teenagers.
Yes. Yeah. And another thing that I'm thinking of is when we want to protect children, not in terms of necessarily like the safety aspects, but maybe health aspects in terms of, so saying no to sugary treats and things like that. So instead of potentially saying no, maybe we should ask them why. So why would you like this? Or, why do you feel this way? What do you think what do you think about this? How do you think this will make you feel? Things like that, being curious and sparking conversations around these topics. And maybe then they will tell us, actually, I know that this is not healthy, but, I still want this because. So it's about engaging them in conversation rather than a flat out no, because that's not helpful, because that's just closing the conversation, saying they can't have a voice, they can't have a choice, we can't discuss this. No means no. The adult, has the authority. And yeah, I truly personally believe it's about opening up conversations, even if the ultimate answer is still going to be no.
Yeah.
You still want to open that conversation.
You have to, because again, even so in the classroom, in your yes space, that conversation is so key, because when they leave our environment, they have to be able to have these internal conversations, because they're going to go to a friend's house where there is no rules on sugar. And you know what? One sugar in a while is not going to hurt anybody, but they're eventually going to be adults that may or not have a different relationship with sugar based on how we broach the conversation when they're little. Right? Even the way we allow children to be creative. So in a yes space, I'm a huge, I really encourage free art. So an art shelf with multiple mediums and paint. You know what? Mixing paint colors is okay. I know that some people just cringed big time inside. And that was me. Like, I am super type A. And we have to come out of it, because mixing paint colors is science. It is discovering. We can't just tell them, don't mix the paint colors, because they don't actually understand why until they see it. And eventually, I've learned that they'll eventually stop mixing the paint colors because they want the yellow, they want the blue, they want the red, right? It's the same with mixing Play-Doh. And this is always a hard one, and I always ask educators to reflect, is using scissors. I love having scissors accessible and out in my classroom. Child scissors, but I mean, I've seen a child nip the top of their finger off with children's scissors as well. So I do understand the fear around it. And I always say, reflect why. Is it because that's the way it's always been done? Is it because you have a particular student in your program that is not safe with scissors? The second safety comes into play, then you have to readjust, because safety is number one priority every time. But if safety is not the concern in terms of, a child dangerously using scissors on another human being, if the danger is a child might nip their finger, then it's guided learning. And that's where the yes comes in. Yes, we can use scissors, but we use them when Miss Ward's right beside you, because we're still learning how to use them. Not, no, you can only use scissors when I tell you it's okay. Because then you've only got scissors being used once a week. And one or two things is going to happen. You're going to have the child that looks at scissors like, oh my goodness, I get to use scissors. And then they're using them completely inappropriately. Or you have a child that is scared to use scissors because they trust you, that as the adult, that you've kept these out of sight and out of mind because they're dangerous to use. Scissors are dangerous. And what a horrible thing to be afraid of. Scissors create amazing things. We use them to cut material, to create fashion. We use them for paper, to create art. We use them to cut hair, hopefully not in your classroom. But scissors have so much use. And having a child be afraid of something is not productive, and it's not going to help them grow as human beings.
Yeah, definitely. It really is all about guiding children and supporting them. And there is that element of it's like you're too young or it's not age appropriate yet, but actually it's looking at the child's development and thinking, can they do this despite of their age? Just because other children their age typically are not using scissors or whatever it might be, or climbing up high. Actually considering, can I support this child? Can they do it with help? And then they're able to learn to do this, maybe earlier for the typical age. So it's just about, I guess, one, knowing your child, and two, being open to guiding them through something rather than the default being no.
Exactly. And looking at our own childhood, Because
Yeah.
for many of us, especially us 80s, 90s kids, no was like a prominent word in our household. And I say I grew up in a yes environment, but in the sense that I was allowed to use anything, touch anything. Like we didn't have plug covers on the walls. We just knew not to, put our fingers in the socket. But no was still a big factor. I mean, when I went to school, no, you sit down, you stand up when a teacher walks into the room, you greet them. Like it was very, very traditional and very rigid.
Yeah.
Thankfully, my home life countered it, but I know people that it didn't counter. And so they didn't trust themselves. And there's just so much power in yes, when you're allowed to be creative, and creative comes in so many different forms, whether it's block play, whether it's at the art table, whether it's just thinking creatively. Because if you keep getting met with no, your ability to think innovatively, goodness gracious, to problem solve and to think critically gets stifled. And the goal is not for a child to be able to solve a worksheet problem. The worksheet problem is supposed to eventually, well, hopefully we never do worksheet problems, but the goal is to take those worksheet problems into the real world.
Yes.
The real world is faced with problems that you couldn't even make up. Sometimes I tell people stories and I'm like, are these really the problems that I'm dealing with in my childcare program, wherever? Like you can't make it up, but you want to have that critical thinking skill to look at the problem and say, okay, what do I know? How can I solve this creatively? Can I do this collaboratively? And that's a huge piece of yes spaces. When children are allowed to flow freely through the classroom, they're going to make better friendships. They're going to be able to work with their peers, not always well. They're going to have to learn to collaborate, to problem solve with their peers. There's going to be conflicts. And that is a beautiful thing. Because you are there as the educator to guide that conflict. Because when we go out in the real world, there are conflicts. You are not going to like everybody. You are not going to work well with everybody. But you can be respectful, right?
Definitely.
And we can guide that in a yes space. So there's so many benefits to a yes space where we are not deciding every child's every move, because that's not how life is. Life is not having somebody decide every move for you unless you're in preschool, kindergarten, or toddler.
Yes, and I love that you mentioned these important life skills. That's what it's all about. That's what early childhood is all about. Us as educators supporting children to develop these life skills. And we talked about yes spaces for children. So I'd really like to address yes spaces for adults as well. So what does this mean for adults? So I know that a lot of the time we may be in spaces where actually people say no to us, almost like by default. So leadership teams, managers may say no, but actually, why are we saying no? Is it because it's too difficult? Is it because it's just what we've always done? There's not enough time, and it's too much to think about this right now. And my partner talks about this. I can't remember what company. He said he listened to this on a podcast, but he was saying how in a company, I think it must be something like really big, and I'm kicking myself for not knowing. But anyway, it doesn't matter. We don't need to mention other companies. But so if an employee comes to you as a manager with something that they would like to do, they're asking for your permission. Instead of saying no, you're not allowed to say no. You can say yes. You're not allowed to say no. Instead of saying no, you have to write a page on why that cannot be possible. So this takes effort and careful consideration. And then you might think, okay, do I really want to say no by, writing this? It's not just a default no. And also, whilst kind of considering it, you might think, actually, no, you know what? I'll say yes because it's not such a bad thing after all. So I guess it's really pausing and thinking, why should I say yes rather than the default instantly be no?
Absolutely. And admin is a huge hurdle, whether you're trying to put a yes space into your own classroom or in terms of creating an environment of yes, is people leave, and I can speak for myself. I very rarely stayed at a center once I felt I had learned everything I needed to learn. In childcare, there is no reason for you to be able to say, that's it. I've learned everything I need to know.
Mm-hmm.
Because one, children are constantly challenging and changing us. And our admin should be supporting that as well. So
Mm-hmm.
if there's something you want to learn, which is why you're going to your administrator and saying, I want to try this, or I need this, or I would like to learn this, the default should be yes, because your coworker is telling you what they need. They've taken time out of their day to say, I need this. And really the underlying message is, you need to give this to me in order for me to stay, in order for me to have a reason to stay. I'm craving this. I'm needing this. Now, I love the idea of writing a page report as an administrator, because the default is no, because our default is thinking, oh my God, it's one more thing. And I know that. Like, I remember a supervisor, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's one more thing. But is that one more thing going to make you a better administrator? Is it going to make your staff member a better staff member? Is it going to give them control and help them be a happier staff member?
Mm-hmm.
When your team is happy, your workload is so much lighter already.
Yes.
Because you don't have people interrupting your flow of your workday to complain.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So yes is always the default.
Yeah. And obviously there's constraints in terms of time and mainly money, but it's really about, saying, yes, I think that's a great idea. Or I'd love for you to do this. We need to try and work out how we can make this happen. So I guess the default should still be yes rather than no. And then thinking, how are we going to make it happen? When can this be possible? How can we find the budget? How can we find the time? Who can support us with this? So that kind of mindset.
Yes. Oh, exactly. Like with my consulting clients, I always say, don't ever answer a question with yes, but. Like, remove the but from your vocabulary. If you need to, because of budgetary constraints, you want to answer with yes, and. Yes, and let's sit down and brainstorm how we're going to get it. So, for example, if you want to bring plants into your program, which, by the way, enhances every yes space, you can't go around just buying plants. Plants are expensive. So it's yes, and let's talk about a plant campaign so that we can bring plants into the classroom without hurting our budget.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yeah. So yes, and versus yes, but.
I love that. I love that so much. I'm going to try and use that now. Yeah, that is such a good mindset to have.
Yeah. And yes just has so many benefits on both ends, for children, for adults, even in personal relationships. Yeah. Right? I will say that I am probably worse in my marriage than I am with children and coworkers when it comes to saying yes. Like, if, I want my husband buys this ugly couch. No. Right? Instead of, okay, yes, what's your thought process here? So even in our personal relationships, yes can really open up that relationship to autonomy, to competent and capable in your own relationship, to feeling in control of your own personal life too, right?
That's a really good point. And reflecting on myself, I think I'm very similar to you as well. And, I need to be at least more curious than kind of judgmental and being like, no, that's just not right. Or I don't like that. I actually think, okay, where are you going with this?
Yeah.
At least
it's
if
so
you
hard
say
in a
yes.
marriage. Yeah.
Well, I'm not even married yet, so.
But in any relationship, right? Roommates, friendships, like, you're used to going to the same restaurant every week, and then somebody suggests something completely different. It's, to your point of what you encourage people to do, is step out of your comfort zone. Just try it. If the restaurant is garbage, you go back to what you know. But at least you can say you tried.
Yeah. And I definitely personally need to do more of this. I'm sat here kind of talking to you about this, really encouraging other people, but I need to reflect on myself more.
We all do.
Well, thank you so much for this discussion. I think it will probably inspire all of the listeners and viewers to say yes more. It certainly inspired me to say yes more, and I was already on board after hearing it from you. So please do tell the listeners and viewers, where can they find you and your work and your podcast as well?
Absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram at EL Foundations with an S at the end, or you can listen to my voice more on the Everything EC podcast. And we have tons of opportunities. We've got an EC community that's always very active. So just check me out on Instagram and let's touch base there.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure that all of that information of where to find you is in the episode description. And if the listeners and viewers enjoyed this episode, you might also like the episode on life skills over academic achievement by Carmela Garcia Manas and Zana Clark, which taps into those aspects that myself and Carla just talked about in terms of supporting children with developing and building those life skills. So thank you very much once again, Carla. It's been great having you on the podcast. And I must say that the first time that we met was on LinkedIn. Well, I say met on LinkedIn, and then you invited me on your podcast, which is a brilliant experience. And it's brilliant to have you on the Voice of Early Childhood podcast as well.
Oh, I loved being a guest. It was such a neat experience. Thank you so much.